Hello, everybody. Welcome again to Congressman Morelle's weekly update for us. I want to first of all thank the Congressman for taking time out of his very busy schedule. Quick thank you to Dan Lemire from Congressman Joe Morelle's team, and also Mark Cohen, Cassidy Franklin from our team, for doing a lot of the legwork behind the scenes setting this up. But I want to thank Congressman Morelle for taking time out of his very busy schedule once a week to update us. There's so much going on. I'm not sure if he'll cover this, but I know for a fact he's been on the ground with banks, lenders, as the SBA program rolled out just this past week. A lot of interest there, but he's been very heavily involved with that as well. But really can't thank him enough for taking time. So without any further ado, please welcome Congressman Joe Morelle. Joe, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'll start by offering my thanks to Bob, who's just done a great job, not only in terms of communicating with my office, but I know community-based organizations, the United Way, he's been in touch with, he and his team, and obviously thanks to Mark Cohen and the rest of the folks. Just done, I think, just an amazing job of keeping people together. And I may have said this last week, I'm going to repeat it, because the county executive, our hospital systems, our chamber, our community-based organizations are linked and integrated so much that I have not seen any parallel to this anywhere around the country. I talk to my colleagues all the time. And not only is local government and the federal government linked, but also Vinny Esposito and the folks in the governor's office. The governor's continue to do a terrific job. I talked to him and Larry Schwartz, who Bob knows well, who used to be the secretary of the governor, who's been brought in voluntarily or not, but he's been pressed into service. So I talk to them all the time. So I think everyone is really focused on the right things, which is how do we get through this? How do we keep social distancing? How do we pay attention to our scientists and our doctors and the medical community? How do we do that and still try to make sure that we're helping to make ends meet? So it's a constant struggle, I know. I was saying today to my friend Stephen Ashley that, we're trying to deal with helping 300 Americans get through this, and 300 million people are a lot to try to build a system for in a really, really short period of time. So I know there are frustrations. I know that people are trying to get through this, and we're not perhaps always up to the task, but I guarantee you we're listening. We're trying to highlight challenges. And so I just appreciate you, Bob, and your team have been terrific, and grateful for the opportunity to be with you again.
Well, Joe, thank you. And I think in times like this, having information coming really from the top and people that are directly involved mean a lot to our members in this community. And again, I commend you for being on the ground. You're everywhere. And I also will go along with you. Our county executive, Adam Bell, has done a phenomenal job. Vinny Esposito from the state, we're all in touch all the time. Dr. Mike Mendoza, and then the governor's team. I will also say that staying in touch with them, they're doing an unbelievable job. And I think that, crises like these, they bring out the best in people, and we should be very proud at our state level and especially our local level, how we all work together, especially in your position. If we want to get to it, we have a lot of questions coming in. We have somewhere between 100 and 200 people on the line right now that are here, which is really a credit to wanting to listen to you. Not in particular order, but we've asked them to submit questions. They're coming in. If you want to go, Joe, I'll start with the first one. First question I have here is, can you do a quick overview of the programs available for small businesses?
Yeah, thanks. A great question. We've been trying to get the word out as much as we can. So as part of the third package of bills that we did, the first one was an immediate emergency appropriation of $8.3 billion, and that was to try to provide support for testing, which still isn't at the level we'd like it to be, but is getting much better in recent days. So we're hopeful about that. The second package really dealt with sick leave and paid family leave for people who were affected directly by the virus, either had contracted it themselves or a family member, or for reasons related to the virus, had child care and school-age children issues. The third bill, which is the one that's obviously attracting most of the attention, was the CARES Act. And the CARES Act has a number of elements, but the ones directly related to small businesses is the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. And this is administered through the Small Business Administration and their network of providers and lenders. So regional banks, and I won't name any, but we've been talking to them. about how to do this, but people who are certified SBA lenders have this program, which is a loan that's given to small businesses, and it could be as small as independent contractors or 2 or 3 people shops, all the way up to businesses that employ 500 people. And based on your revenues and based on your salaries and tax returns, you get a multiplier of your payroll that provides you with a loan, which is 100% forgivable if during the period of the loan, from start to finish, you don't reduce headcount. So if you have 15 people on payroll at the beginning of the loan period, and you have 15 at the end of essentially 2 months, which is sort of the period that the program is intended to provide revenues. If you don't reduce that headcount, still have 15 people at the end of that period, the loan is 100% forgivable. And the permitted uses for the money are payroll, health insurance premiums if you provide benefits to your workers, overhead, meaning utility bills, rent, mortgage, debt service on equipment. So we like the ratio. I think the Treasury Department and SBA have given guidance that they would like 75% or more of the cost that you're paying for the payroll and headcount. But this is really, I think, the best program. Now, we've spoken a lot to the bankers because there was some confusion last week about what their obligations were to validate information, but more and more there's been guidance to work off the honor system. You're going to have to validate that you have payroll, headcount, taxes, information, but it won't have to be validated by the banks. We're relying on people to be honest. Honestly, if they don't and they're determined in an audit to have been to have falsified information, that's punishable. But other than that, the banks, I'm told, are able to process these much faster. So that's really the primary method by which I think small businesses will be protected, where their workers will not have to be laid off. One other important piece of information is there are a couple of things you should know. Any employee who makes more than $100,000 a year, you can pay through this program only up to the first $100,000. After that, that is not covered under the forgivable part of the loan. The other thing is that even if you've laid off people, you can bring them back on payroll during this period. So there is retroactivity that will allow you to pay for their payroll going forward.
Great, that's a great answer. No particular order. I'm not sure what order they're coming in, but they're coming in like crazy here. You'll get a lot of small business questions, and next one here is, are there any grants or loans designed for the truly small businesses? And this person is saying, to me, small is less than 30 employees.
Yeah, well, that's how the person may define it. That's not how the federal government's defining it. So we define it as fewer than 500. So we want to capture clearly small mom and pop operations. So things like a barbershop, nail salon, small restaurant that relies on dining in place as opposed to takeout or delivery. But any small business would qualify. And we cast a wide net. You're right. Typically, you'd think of small businesses much smaller, but we're equally concerned about medium-sized businesses. The whole philosophical approach has been in the $2 trillion stimulus bill was to really try to get money to individuals, families. That's why we expanded the unemployment benefit program for those people who are furloughed or laid off, but also for the smallest of businesses all the way up through medium-sized business. So if you have 200-300 employees, your loan will be measured by the size of it. The maximum loan is $10 million. I think we put, $349 billion of the $2 trillion went into the Paycheck Protection Program. I think it's likely that we will now extend that because it was first come, first served, and we're seeing that the number of people applying is probably going to outpace the supply of dollars we put in the first bill. So I think you're going to see the program extended in terms of length of time, but also think it's going to be extended in terms of dollars. It could be another $150 billion. I've heard reports that it's being also talked about $200 billion plus. Again, that's because the demand is so great, but that's how we measured it. I think it's because we wanted to try to keep businesses in place. And obviously Bob and everyone on the call knows what we don't want to have happen is when you come through this, let's say it's 6 weeks from now, maybe under worst case scenario, it's 2 months or more. We don't want to add further disruption to businesses who are then stuck with having to reassemble their teams. I remember when I had my software development business, we had 12 employees. If I had to lay them all off and then 2 months later try to rehire them all, I'm sure some would have moved on, some would have other found opportunities. I'd be rebuilding a team. I'd have to retrain people. We'd have to, it would really be challenging. That's why we did it this way, to try to make sure that there isn't a second disruption economically. Once the crisis is passed, from a healthcare perspective, we wanted to make sure that we were up and ready to go and that people continue to have their organizations together. That's how 500 became the number. And there are some operations where there's franchisees who, if they had more than 500 but at different locations, they might be able to qualify as well.
Great, good answer. Next question coming in. Does the PPP cover paid sick leave?
Typically, I don't think you would. I think it would not. I'll get clarification on that, but I don't think if you have paid sick leave, I think that's already in the anticipated cost. But let me see if anybody on my team will correct me on it. Hopefully, they will if I'm wrong. But the paid benefits under the second bill that we did, which people are impacted because of child care or because their child is home, because school is closed, that's a separate program. That is a tax credit, which is fully refundable. So if you had to pay out, let's say $10,000 to employees through paid family leave, you would file that on your taxes as a credit. That would be 100% refundable. So that's how there's a separate piece that would pay for that as opposed to using the PPE. But I'll double check to make sure that I'm not wrong on that. But there was a second bill separate and apart. It is narrow because it only applies to those workers who have to be home because of childcare closing or school being out, and now people have to be home with their children.
That's great. Next question. It looks like this might be from one of our not-for-profit organizations here. What support is there for not-for-profit human services organizations over 500 employees?
So before I get to that, I'm going to ask you to repeat it, but I did want to, my staff is very sharp, and this is why I hire really smart people, but I'm getting an answer that yes, the PPP covers payroll costs, which can include employee benefits, such as costs for parental, family, medical, or sick leave. However, the CARES Act expressly excludes qualified sick and family leave wages for which a credit is allowed under Section 7001 and 7003 of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So I was partly right that if you qualified under the second bill we did, the Families First Coronavirus Act, and get paid family leave under that, which is 100% a refundable tax credit, then you cannot use the PPP to pay for that. But if you do not qualify for that under the second bill, then you can use the PPP proceeds to pay for other existing programs. So thank you, Joe Stiles on my staff, for giving me a fuller explanation of that. We can get you more information on it, but that's how that works. So I apologize. I was looking at that when you were asking the other questions. So
no, I tell you what, I think your grasp of specifics is unbelievable. This next question, it comes from one of our not-for-profit leaders. What support is there for not-for-profit human services organizations over 500 employees?
So that's a really great question. We're exploring what the next round of bills will be and whether or not we need to expand in the not-for-profit community. The large ones have been some of the groups we talked about. So for instance, not to pick on one, but my friends at the YMCA have clearly more than 500 employees. We want to keep them whole and try to help nurture them without having to furlough or lay off employees. So something we're looking at. And we've heard from other local regional chapters of not-for-profits who are part of a national chain. And they're concerned about whether or not their small organization here, the Rochester chapter, for instance, might have fewer than 500 employees, but because of their affiliation, whether or not they get swept under that. So we can provide probably help with folks. We are seeing some struggles with this, so it's one of the kinds of organizations that we're going to look to either in the fourth or fifth bill, so we can help to address some of those concerns as well.
That's great. Great answer, Joe. Next from our libraries. This question coming in: how are libraries addressed in the COVID-19 relief legislation?
Well, most of the libraries, I'll look to see if my folks have specific comments about libraries, but typically libraries are part of either a municipal organization. So like, for instance, the town of Irondequoit's libraries, I'm sure the city libraries as well, they're closed, obviously, although some of them are doing digital lending, but they would be covered under whatever their public government is doing. I think so. In Irondequoit, I'd confer with Supervisor Seeley, but I'm pretty sure they're keeping their payroll entirely intact. So the libraries are functioning in terms of the employees being paid for, but obviously they're not lending out, nor are they taking book returns right now because the virus can reside on surfaces for a while. So they are trying to expand their digital lending. So if you have, as I do, I use a Kindle app on my iPad to do much more reading than I ever thought I would do. So they're doing lending that way. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, great answer. These are coming in fast, Joe. Next question. I haven't received approval for my loan yet, and I'm worried the money is going to run out. Will I still get relief?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned, the program was designed as a first come first serve, and we appropriated for $349 billion to it. But I mean, what's clearly going to happen is we're going to either do by unanimous consent, I think, potentially even as early as late this week or certainly next week, expansion of that program so more dollars are made available. We are working with the lenders, as I said. They were frustrated at the beginning because the Treasury Department and the Small Business Administration's initial guidance put more responsibility on them for verifying data, which just would have taken too much time to get the money out the door. So I think many of those issues have been resolved. We've been talking to the state's Community Bankers Association. We've been talking to local lenders. My understanding is that has been much better in the last couple of days, and hopefully the proceeds of loans will be coming much faster now. But we do expand. I do expect that we're going to expand the pool of dollars available to underwrite the program.
That's great. No, thanks. Okay, next question. Any update on when Chase and other banks will begin processing the SBA PPP loan applications?
Yeah, so that's what I was referring to. I haven't talked to JP Morgan, but we have friends over there. We've been talking to a lot of the regional banks to make sure that we understand what challenges they have. I think that it's getting better. We've been told it's getting better. We're continuing to try to communicate with them to make sure they get the money out the door. So hopefully in the next few days, because what we know is, and the reason the program was put in place and was relatively simple, was that the amount of money people have often is just a few days worth of cash. And so there's going to be a real problem. There are also emergency grants that are up to $10,000 that people can borrow. And I think if you have one of those, which is much quicker turnaround, as long as you extinguish the first loan, I think you can still qualify for the PPP. You cannot have both loans at the same time. So if you take out the $10,000 emergency loan, you have to extinguish it before you can get the PPP.
Great. I want to thank the people that are listening today because you're pumping in a lot of questions very quickly here. Our next one is, what documents do I need to apply for these loans?
Well, generally, I think you need to have payroll information and tax information. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot of validation, as I understand it. And that was part of the challenge was whether or not we were going to require the banks to have to do underwriting and validate it. That wasn't what Congress intended. I think now the Treasury and SBA understand that. So probably your latest tax filing and payroll information. So if you use, either if you do the payroll yourself or if you use a third party like Paychex, ADP, or other processors, you'd have to have that data and have that prepared to go onto your applications.
Great.
I also am checking in. My staff reminds me, we have a conversation tomorrow with the Bankers Association to hear from them on what's going on the ground, what their firsthand experience is, so that if there are tweaks to it, we can use this opportunity leading up to what I hope is the fourth and probably fifth stimulus bill to try to address those.
That's great. Oh, okay. Next one in here. I'm concerned my loan will only be partially forgiven. What happens if that is the case?
I think the rules are you get 2 years to pay it back. So in other words, if you found that you borrowed $100,000 and 80,000 of it was forgivable. The 20,000, I believe, is paid back over a 2-year period, and I think it's interest-free. But let me get clarification from my staff on that. But I think it's a 2-year payback, and I believe there we go. If you do owe money, you will have 2 years to pay off the balance of the loan. So Joe's right on that. At 1% interest rate, so it is low interest. No payments required for the first 6 months after you get the loan. So it is very low interest, 1%, 2 years to pay back, get the first 6 months without payment, and then and that's only for the portion that would not be forgivable.
Great. Gives you a sense of who is on the line here. We have a lot of people that are going through this process. Our next question coming in, my current bank is only servicing customers with existing commercial accounts. Is that allowed under the CARES Act?
It's not. I don't remember it being specified. We tried, and we are trying to expand the number of SBA lenders who are certified to give out those 100% guaranteed loans. Frankly, I'd love to know offline where you're having trouble getting those loans, because we can follow up. And I would say people who want to either email us or just go to my website, which is morelle.house.gov. You can also call the office. Our local number in Rochester is 232-4850. People are working remotely, so it's going to take a little time. You won't get picked up immediately. Leave a voicemail. We'll get back to you. But we're trying to work with area lenders to be as flexible as we can. This is a guaranteed loan, so the federal government is backing up the loans, obviously not only in terms of forgiving them, but guaranteeing them for the bank. So we would work with people, and if your lender doesn't participate for whatever reason, we can probably be helpful in trying to direct you to lenders who are willing to underwrite the loan.
Great. For our listeners, the Congressman just mentioned he's meeting with the Bankers Association tomorrow. So send questions or any additional questions to his office. If they come to ours, we will forward them right to the Congressman's office and his team, so he has those. So it's great information, a great flow, Joe. This is perfectly timely. The next one coming in here.
And I do think it's helpful if people want to work through you, Bob, in your office. Obviously, we're communicating on a continuous basis. So if that's easier for them, and I don't want to put more work on your plate, but however people want to get in touch with us, we'll try to do everything we can to be helpful. And I will say, we're getting people now that they're sort of going through the guidance from SBA. There are certain types of businesses that are excluded, and we're gathering that information. For instance, I heard from a company that has a horse farm. There are certain exclusions for farmers under the program, so we're trying to really understand now some of the narrow cases and trying to make sure that our voice is heard and that people who are experiencing these challenges, that we try to enter that into the conversation about what the next several bills will look like.
Thanks. So now I want to say our teams, we're blessed having great teams. We communicate every day, and just to really appreciate the Congressman's flexibility with this. These are great questions coming in, and the answers are outstanding. I would say one of our callers is an HR leader. Our next question, if an employee is terminated with cause, are they eligible for immediate unemployment insurance with the new program?
That's a great question. I don't know. Let's see. I believe they are eligible for unemployment benefits. They should apply through the New York State website. I know that, so the answer is yes. I know that the state has been challenged around its unemployment insurance website. I spoke to a labor commissioner, Commissioner Reardon, yesterday, and we're working with them. They've got new technology on board. They're working with a whole host of additional providers, so that website ought to be better to use. Want to remember, so there are two different types of unemployment insurance too, and I want to just be clear about this. For people who are like sole proprietors and people who would not have qualified, 1099 independent contractors, freelancers, would not have qualified under the traditional program. We've set up something called the Pandemic Unemployment Program, and that allows people who are denied under traditional unemployment to access the Pandemic Unemployment Insurance Program. So I just want to make clear on that. If you've been denied because you're not a typical, it'll automatically get rerouted and you apply for the Pandemic unemployment insurance program or PUA program. But yes, people who are let go are eligible. The typical 1 week waiting period, usually you have to wait a full week of unemployment before you qualify. That's been waived, so you qualify now from the date of termination. And also we've added 13 weeks on to the benefits. So the typical New York State maximum benefit is 26 weeks. We've added 13 weeks to make it 39 weeks. And there's a $600 additional benefit from the federal government. That's an enhancement or supplement to the standard rate. So the maximum in New York, I believe, is $500 under unemployment insurance. So you add $600 from the feds, it now makes it an $1,100 program. If you would only get $300 or $400 in the past, it would now be either $900 or $1,000 a week. I may have said month, weekly benefit under the enhanced program.
Great. Okay, they're still coming in the questions here. Our next one just received: if salaried managers reduced to working 2 days per week, if they are not eligible for unemployment benefits, can they apply for the $600 benefit?
I believe people who have reduced hours are now available to apply for the program. If you work less than 4 days a week and earn $600 or $504 a week or less, you might be able to receive partial unemployment benefits. If you are not traditionally eligible, again, going back to the pandemic unemployment agency, or PUA, they call it PUA, pandemic unemployment assistance, you may be eligible for that as well. And that again is 39 weeks and $600 additional benefit through July 31st, I think is the period during which you'll get the enhanced plan. But that again may be expanded when we go back to Washington, given the length of the pandemic, given the disruptions. There's talk of extending that benefit as well. Hasn't happened yet, I want to be clear. So this unemployment insurance enhanced benefit goes through July 31st.
Great.
But the extra weeks are go on obviously beyond that.
Excellent. Next question coming in, unemployment question. I think Melissa DeRosa had tried to address this yesterday. Can you suggest anything for people who are struggling to get to a live representative at the New York State unemployment line?
So a couple things. I'm told, and this may be a change that that there was at the beginning of the program, people were saying you had to talk to a live person to finalize the application. I'm told that's no longer the case. They can fully apply online. And as I said, I think the governor expressed frustration at their inability to field so many calls. I will say this, the amount of calls now going into unemployment has gone up by a factor of 10 or 20 times what the typical week was. So I do have some sympathy that we're all dealing with this in a very short period of time for millions and millions of people. But I talked to the commissioner yesterday. They brought in additional vendors on the backbone to help process. So the website, I hope, is not crashing as much. They have opened up 3 new large call centers. So hopefully you can do most things online, but yes, hopefully the call time and the number of times people will have to call for those that have to is going to get shorter in if not today and tomorrow, in the next couple of days. So I know they continue to work on that. And I told the commissioner I'd continue to give her feedback about what we're hearing on the ground. We had a great conversation. I think, Bob, you know, Commissioner Reardon, she's terrific, and she's struggling, but they're doing everything they can. It's sort of ironic that the one place where we're hiring is the unemployment insurance program to help field all the calls for people, unfortunately, who've been either furloughed or let go. But this is the kind of thing that does drive people crazy. I know it's a huge frustration. The good news is this: as you're applying, even if you don't get confirmation that you've been ruled eligible, it will be retroactive back to the date of application.
Great point. Again, to your point, Congressman, I think the sheer volume is just unbelievable, the people calling in. Our next question here, it's a good one. Is this going to be worse than 2008? So many young people are worried about graduating and the bleak job market ahead. Your thoughts on that?
You know, we've talked a fair amount to some national economists, and I won't repeat Harry Truman's line about economists, but nonetheless, you know, some really smart people who are looking at what happened in 2007, 2008. I think perhaps the one difference, and I don't know if this is cause for hope, but what is somewhat unprecedented is not only that the demand for services have sort of dropped off a cliff, but also the supply has. And so we believe there is going to be pent-up demand as soon as we get through this. How long that is obviously is still anyone's guess. We're trying to flatten the curve all the time, but we're hopeful, and that's why, as I go back to the question of even the Paycheck Protection Act, the point of this is to try to make sure we're at a point where we can take off again as soon as we get through the healthcare crisis, is to pave the way for a smoother onboarding of the economy. The other thing that I think you'll see, perhaps not in the next bill we do, but certainly if not in the next one, the one right after, which I expect is going to be in short order, will provide more economic stimulus. So at the back end of the crisis, one of the things that the president's talked about that we're very interested in the House in doing is passing a massive infrastructure bill. And the infrastructure, I think, will not only be the traditional roads and bridges that we all sort of associate with it, but it's going to be infrastructure around healthcare facilities. It's going to be infrastructure around broadband, hopefully the electrical grid, things that even educational facilities. So I think we're going to be thinking more broadly about what infrastructure means. And I do think that's going to help stimulate economic growth when we are all able to get back to work in the more traditional settings.
Great. I'm going to try, with all these questions coming in, and try to consolidate some.
Yeah.
When the work from home mandate ends, is there a plan in place to bring the economy back online in an orderly fashion? And how long do you think that process will take?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that, Bob. You broke up a little.
Yeah, so long as when the work from home mandate ends, is there a plan in place to bring the economy back online in an orderly fashion? And how long do you think that process will take?
Well, again, I think it depends on sort of the flattening of the curve, so to speak. And the governor sounded, I didn't get to hear him today. I know yesterday was sounding some very, very, and I stress very, very cautious optimism that we might start to see now a flattening of the curve. And some people are now revising estimates that we might see 60,000 deaths in the United States, which, by the way, is just beyond heartbreaking. I think we had about 13 to 14,000 reported deaths as of this morning, so we have a long way to go. But the number of people in terms of hospitalizations does seem as though it's flattening out. So it'll depend. The time when we sort of allow non-essential workers to go back to work, I think, is entirely dependent on the length of that period where we hit the apex and start coming back down on the other side. I've been talking, obviously, to the county executive. I think we're starting to feel a little bit, and again, I want to be very cautious about what I say because I don't want people to have this as gospel, but I think we're feeling a little more optimistic, but there's a long way to go. So we could be dealing with this probably until mid to the end of May at the best case scenario, June, July at the worst case. So this is really going to depend on people social distancing, people wearing masks now while out in public. We should all treat it. I've heard this a number of times now, so I feel comfortable repeating this. We should all act as though we've got the virus, even if we're not symptomatic. That way, by covering, using the masks, that isn't really intended to keep people from getting it. It's really intended to protect you from other people. So when you go in places like Wegmans or Tops or wherever you go that is essential, really having the mask will help keep people to be exposed from you. And we should all act as though we have it and we just don't know. Because frankly, depending on what estimates you look at, and I don't want to get too far afield, it's not my area of expertise, but they say between 25 and 50% of Americans who have the virus will be asymptomatic. So even if it's 1 in 4, that means you can be passing it on and not know you have it yourself, which is why we're just cautioning over and over again, just continue to hang in there. I know this is tough. I know some people disagree and feel we should really be firing up the economy again, and that'll do longer term damage by not doing that. I think the science, though, is not agreeing with that right now. So we need a little more patience. We need to get through this, and then that will allow us to get back to the non-essential workers getting back to work and firing up the economy. And we're going to be helpful to try to stimulate that wherever we can.
Oh, great advice. Great advice on the social distancing too. I think the reason it's flattening is because people are listening. and the county executive put the mandate out about the mask, and I thought that's a prudent one. And I think on record, I wore one for the first time yesterday. It was uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. And so I applaud our leaders for pushing these things, and yourself included. Next question. People are thinking about the next bill coming, next stimulus bill. Will the next bill provide protections for health insurance coverage? And will employers be required to continue their coverage?
Well, a couple things. First of all, we've reopened. The governor, through the Department of Financial Services, required all the insurers to reopen their enrollment period. As many of you know, there's usually a limited enrollment period that we have. And I won't get into the technical reasons why that exists, but the governor has asked them to reopen so people who don't have insurance can go to the exchange, can go into the marketplace and buy insurance. But the Paycheck Protection Program does allow employers to continue to buy or to pay for premiums. So you can use the loan proceeds under the PPP to pay healthcare premiums for your workers. So that's encouraging. The other thing is, I believe, and I don't have full information about this, so I want to be a little careful, but I would encourage people to go to the Department of Financial Services today, issued information to commercial insurers that they allow for people who are under distress economically a partial period of not having to pay premiums and keep policies in place. I don't know as much about it because it just came out, I think, this morning, but people should be looking at the Department of Financial Services. So it's nydfs.gov, I believe. NY as in New York, D as in David, F as in Frank, S as in Services, DFS, Department of Financial Services, .gov, and I think you get more information. But we really want to keep people obviously having health insurance because it's more critical now than ever.
Great answer on that one. Question, is there any information on a request submitted to Congress by the National Early Childhood Coalition asking for a child care stimulus package?
You know, there's a lot of conversations about issues that relate to child care, a lot of issues relating to education. And I think once we get sort of continue to work through the making sure we have enough money to keep small businesses going through the forgivable loans, so the expansion of the PPP, as soon as we make sure that food distribution and programs like SNAP benefits, which is Supplemental Nutrition Program, then we're really starting to dig down and look at some of these other things. The child care organizations, whether they're for-profit or not-for-profit, are eligible to apply for the 100% forgivable loan under the PPP. There was 3.5 billion additional for the Child Care Development Block Grant for some organizations. So that's to provide child care assistance to healthcare sector employees. So that money would be used to help keep those organizations still alive, keep them funded. But we'll continue to look for more support for child care in the upcoming packages.
I think people listening should understand the work you have done on this whole social service system, trying to create much more alignment and connectivity, because it's a huge system. And over the last couple of years, you've done an extraordinary job working with all the agencies here, trying to make that, I think, much more simpler, I guess, for lack of a better word, to navigate through. So I think it's a great answer, a great to the question, and one that's really important. I'm looking at the time, Congressman. I know you have other things going on today, but I take my prerogative. I have a Bob question here. People don't realize this, but I say politics being a full contact sport, people may not realize our congressman is a black belt in karate. So obviously we have the toughest congressman probably in the nation. But Joe, let me ask you, with all the things closed here, gyms, what are you doing physically to keep up and stay in shape?
That's a great question. I've been trying to go on walks every morning with my wife. We usually do a few miles, so I'm getting my steps in. I've set up a really basic. I have a bench and some dumbbells, and I'm doing what they call in karate kata. I know you're a practitioner. I think you practice the same style I did. So trying to get through it. The saddest thing about this, and I don't mean to be in any way demean my wife, but she has taken such good care of me and preparing meals for me, unlike at any time during our 36-year marriage. So this has really been adding to my waistline. I'm really a little anxious about it, but we're getting through it. And I do encourage everybody to get out and walk. I do find this, that in terms of people getting the message, when I pass neighbors by on our walk in the morning or in the evening, people do separate. We wave, we get to chat a little bit, but at safe distances. I really encourage that, and it's really important. I'm sure you're so aware of it, that we have to keep our mental, emotional, and physical well-being is all intertwined. So we got to encourage people to continue to try to get the heart pumping and try to stay well as best we can.
That's great advice. I'm going to give you a chance to make some closing comments, but I have to say this, Joe. All these questions coming in, your grasp of these topics, I'm amazed at, because they're coming in from every possible conceivable area. There's no rhyme or reason when they're coming in, but I just applaud you for having really the ability to give not only just a global answer, but really specific, granular answers to these questions, which I think is something we all appreciate, and I think everybody listening would appreciate as well. We do this once a week, which is great, but I have a couple closing comments just for some informational stuff. I want you to make maybe just closing comments to our listeners before you sign off.
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, that's very nice of you to say. I really have to credit my incredible team, Sean Hart, who runs our office at the Federal Building, Kaylee Benedict, who many people have, I'm sure, interacted with, as our community outreach officer, Nick Weatherby, my chief of staff, Kristen Anderson, Abby Sorrentino, who leads our legislative effort, Joe Stiles. I'm going to get in trouble now because I'm mentioning names, which I probably should do. John Polito, who heads our constituent services. We just have a great team. They have been working so hard and just continue to be such an incredible support to me. And they're really the smart people. I just learn from them. So I want to thank them. And if you have questions for us, just continue to email us, check in on our website. We're trying to make sure Joe Leathersich, who does a lot of it with Dana Vernetti, our communications people, trying to make sure our website is filled with information, and Adele and Toy, who do our constituent services as well, Maria, Jane. I'm sure, well, Jordan, Ebony, and Dan. I think I've mentioned everybody. If I didn't, I'm really going to hear about it. So I can tell you this was a mistake to start down this road, but I'm just blessed to have amazing people who work with me. So thanks to them. Thanks to all you do, Bob. I'm grateful for the chance to continue to have the conversation. And I'm really grateful when people are stuck because the program which we built, which is really sort of big, but doesn't get to everybody, we're really grateful to know about it so that we can try to think about how we inform our colleagues around the country about the things that we're hearing on the ground, so we can keep people as whole and together as much as we possibly can.
Well, it's a great teams have great leaders, and I want to thank your team. I want to thank Mark Cohen and Cassidy Franklin, our team here, for putting us all together so people realize we're doing this every Wednesday. Congressman has really dedicated some of his time away, so a few more questions still coming in. We'll get to those next week. I just want to respect the Congressman's time. He is very busy, but he's taken this time out to really to share these answers, which I think, as I said before, to be so specific on these questions that are evolving every day. Kudos to you and your team, Joe. So stay healthy, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks for everything. Thank you.
Thank you.